be here with you today. It's such a privilege to be here. Maybe to start, not a lot of people realize that S&P Global Ratings has anything to do with the world of sustainability or climate. I think typically when someone hears S&P Global Ratings, they might think of traditional finance, credit ratings, or indices like the S&P 500. For example, S&P Global Ratings has a credit rating on the country of Trinidad and Tobago. So that's typically, I think, what people think of when they hear S&P. But S&P's mission is to provide intelligence on what investors care about. And investors really care about climate change. And the reason they care is clear. I don't need to tell you all in this room. If we don't transition to a low-carbon economy by 2050, there will be devastating universal consequences. So climate change is a big threat, but it's also an opportunity for those willing to innovate, as we've heard this morning and will continue to hear over the next couple of days. So my team at S&P analyzes green bonds, but rather than doing that from the traditional credit perspective, we do it from the green perspective. So this means rather than asking, how likely is it that this bond issuer will pay its debt back, we ask, how consistent is this bond with a low-carbon, climate-resilient future? But my hope is that when my time is up, you'll have some new knowledge about the green bond market and what an investor is looking for when considering a green bond. Great, well, before diving in, I'd like to share just a bit of my personal motivation. I love the theme and the energy around sharing our purpose and motivation this morning. I'd like to quickly poll the room. Could I see a show of hands? Could you raise your hand if you think that we will actually reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 in line with the Paris Agreement? Does anyone in the room think we'll do that? Any optimists? Well, I'm not seeing any hands, and admittedly, I share your view. I think it's very challenging, and it can be hard every morning to wake up to a new report of global warming record being set or a new climate disaster causing unprecedented damage. Sometimes it feels like limiting temperature rise just isn't possible. But I remind myself in those low moments that creating a more livable future isn't a binary yes or no outcome. It's a spectrum of different potential outcomes. And the reality is that every fraction of every degree matters and is worth fighting for and working for. So that's what keeps me motivated every day. And we heard this morning how there's no silver bullet solution to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Green bonds and the sustainable bond market aren't a silver bullet solution. But they motivate me because they do have the potential to be one of many valuable tools in the pursuit of creating a livable planet. Oh, whoops. There we go. So what's the problem that we're trying to solve with green bonds? The problem is pretty simple. We need a lot more money going to climate goals. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, known as the IPCC, found that current annual climate financing flows across all sectors need to increase by 3 to 6 times by 2030 to meet mitigation goals. So green bonds represent a part of this climate financing solution. And we've heard some great definitions and overview of what green bonds are. But just to recap, the defining feature of a green bond is that it has a targeted use of proceeds, which ensures that the funds raised are directed only to projects with clear environmental benefits. We heard several categories of green bonds. Examples can be renewable energy, clean transportation, and more. So the good news is that green bonds have proven to be durable and resilient since the first one was issued in 2007. Green bonds make up about 60% of the sustainable bond market, equal to about $575 billion USD in 2023. And green bonds can be useful to issuers in that they can attract different types of investors that are interested specifically in impact and green bonds. And in some cases, investors have even been willing to accept lower yields for a green bond. That's not the case every time, but there have been cases where issuers can get a lower interest rate, essentially, for a green bond. But the interesting story here, I think, is how green bond issuance has grown as a share of the total bond market. So that's not shown in this visual here, but I can share it verbally. I think this is my favorite green bond statistic of all time. 10 years ago, less than 0.1% of the total bond market was green or sustainable. And now we're at about 12% of global bond issuance being green or sustainable. And I think that's incredible to think about, that about 12% of global bond issuance is now aligned with sustainable outcomes. One day, hopefully, we'll get to 100, but 12 is a great start and shows a lot of growth. And from this perspective, green bonds are a tremendous success story. But there are challenges with the sustainable bond market. If we look at the figure on the left of the screen, we can see that very few issuers in lower income countries, which are most exposed to physical climate risks and did the least to cause the problem of climate change, are issuing sustainable bonds. Just 1%, the tiny purple sliver, almost imperceptible on the screen, are coming from lower income countries. Another challenge is sectoral inclusivity. Only 3.6% of sustainable bond issuance comes from fossil fuel and hard-to-abate sectors. And this is a problem because hard-to-abate sectors, this would include things like steel, cement, chemicals, make up about 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. So the transition to a low-carbon future can't happen without them. Building wind farms and solar parks is great, but it will only get us so far. We need to transition the existing economy and these heavy emitting assets as well. So if we know this, why aren't these sectors attracting the climate financing and investment they need? Part of the reason for this, in our view, is concern in the market about greenwashing, which is a term that has come up a couple of times this morning. Greenwashing is essentially overstating the green credentials of an investment. So to give an example, take an investor that buys a green bond from a high-emitting oil and gas company. This green bond will fund a wind farm. This seems great, but if only a tiny portion of the company's capital expenditure is going towards the wind farm, and the company's primary operations continue to involve extensive fossil fuel extraction with no plans to change that, no credible decarbonization strategy in place, then it's possible that the investor has just provided financing for the company to continue business as usual, heavy emitting activities, which is not the purpose of a green bond. So a solution to the challenge of greenwashing is having the green bond externally reviewed by an independent party, and that's where we at S&P Global Ratings come in. We provide various types of external reviews at S&P Global Ratings, including green second-party opinions for green bonds. So what exactly are we looking for when we are conducting an external review of a green bond? Well, one is adherence to ICMA's green bond principles. You've heard this term before. ICMA is the International Capital Markets Association, and their green bond principles are a standardized framework used across sectors, across the green bond market. It's not a framework unique to S&P, and it promotes consistency and best practices. So aspects of the principles that we check for, and this is laid out clearly in ICMA's framework, is, does each project category under the financing provide a clear environmental benefit? Is it well articulated? Another area we check for is the process around evaluating and selecting eligible projects. Are they clearly defined? Are they robust? And does it also include managing wider sustainability risks and trade-offs that the projects may introduce? Everyone in this room knows that sustainability is a series of trade-offs. So is there a well-defined process to identify and manage those trade-offs? Is there a clear process to track the proceeds over the lifetime of the funding to ensure that the proceeds are going to the right place? And is there a clear commitment to reporting on allocation and impact of the proceeds over the lifetime of the issuance? So it's great to get alignment and an external review up front at the pre-issuance stage, but investors also want to track the bond throughout its lifetime and understand where the proceeds are going, what specific projects have been funded with the proceeds, and what the expected impact is of those projects. We also conduct issuer sustainability context, and this is unique to S&P, and this is in response to investor feedback and investor needs. This context analysis helps investors understand whether there is a broader issuer-level strategy that the green bond fits into and supports, and whether there's consistency between what the green bond is funding and what the material sustainability factors actually are for that issuer. So this is a great defense against the strategic inconsistency form of greenwashing that ICMA has identified. Another area of greenwashing risk is lack of ambition. So for green bonds, this could be the question of, is this project sufficiently green? Is it really green enough? And to provide transparency on this aspect, we assign a shade of green. Our Shades of Green approach is innovative in that it acknowledges the importance of both green and transition activities in achieving Paris Agreement goals and covers a spectrum of 6 potential shades that you can see up on the screen. So to give an example, we assign a project dark green if it corresponds to the long-term vision of a low-carbon, climate-resilient future aligned with the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is really our North Star. So solar panels would be an example of a dark green project, because if you envision this future that's aligned with the Paris Agreement, solar panels will still exist in it and be an important part of it. On the other end of the spectrum, we would assign a project a red shade if it impedes the climate transition. So new fossil fuel exploration would be an example of that. But the middle of the spectrum, I think, is the most interesting. It's where a lot of the important transition activity happens. Light green is a particularly important shade. It represents activities at a relatively early stage of the transition, which may not be fully consistent with a low carbon future yet, but still represents important transition steps in the near term. And part of this that is very important is that this shading includes the regional development context in which projects are taking place. So take hybrid cars, for instance. In Norway, where fully electric vehicles are the norm for new car sales, we wouldn't consider hybrids to be green. That would be a step backwards. But in nations like India, for instance, where EV infrastructure is more limited, hybrid road vehicles are a valuable transition step and may likely qualify for a green shade. So that regional development context, the different starting points on the transition journey, is very important to take into account, and our Shades of Green scale aims to do that. Wrapping up, the Shades of Green scale represents an important innovation in that it goes beyond that binary green, not green approach and shows that transition is a spectrum. And sustainable finance will continue to innovate. So we're seeing increased attention to the robustness of entity-level transition plans and tools and frameworks to assess this. Investors want to say, you're issuing a green bond, that's great, but what about your entity as a whole? Is the whole strategy going in the direction of decarbonization? So we're seeing more attention on transition plans at the entity level. We heard this morning about the development of regional taxonomies to reflect local transition needs and improve transparency. Physical climate impacts are also growing in frequency and magnitude, so we're seeing more attention on adaptation, financing, as well as nature and biodiversity. And we're also seeing new financing structures emerge. Blended finance, for example, is particularly interesting as a tool to channel finance to developing economies. We're seeing lots of new innovative debt structures. The Caribbean region really leads on this. Green equity designations are small now, but growing in interest. A green equity designation signals that a company's business model contributes to a low carbon, climate resilient future. So that's an interesting space to watch. That started in the Nordics, but the Brazilian Stock Exchange recently launched a green equity designation program, so it's gaining traction around the globe. So all of these innovations are helpful contributions towards closing the climate financing gap and creating a future that's livable. So that's it from me. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to connecting with you.